郭军，Hello，游艇。
Hello,
Okay.
Right.
Hi.
Hello, the rest, of course.
Hello from Taipei.
I think Professor Du Suhao is here, right?
Yes, I'm here. Already
Okay,
waiting.
thank you. Okay, so maybe now it's at 2 p.m. in Taipei, so maybe we just start our opening remark. Welcome to the workshop, EU-East Asia, a Relational Perspective, jointly organized by UGent and National Taiwan University, Research Center for Humanities and Social Science, Academia Sinica, and the Journal of Social Science and Philosophy. So first, we would like to invite Professor Dr. Du Suhao, executive editor of the JSSP, to give us an opening remark. Let's welcome Professor Du. Thank you, Professor. Please.
Thanks, Professor Ye. Dear Professor Desa and the distinguished guests from Europe and Taiwan. My name is Suhao Du, Research Fellow at Research Center for Humanities and Social Sciences, Academia Sinica, and the executive editor of Journal of Social Sciences and Philosophy, JSSP. I'm very pleased and an honor to declare the workshop EU-East Asia, a Relational Perspective open. On behalf of the Research Center and JSSP, I'm delighted to welcome all of you to the virtual meeting. The goal of this workshop are twofold. One is to provide forum for the exchange of information between participants in Europe and Taiwan in this interdisciplinary meeting. The other one is, of course, to provide an opportunity to publish your masterpieces on the special issue of JSSP. So let me briefly introduce the journal and the research center. Why does this journal deserve you? The Journal of Social Sciences and Philosophy is a journal published by the Research Center for Humanities and Social Sciences, Academia Sinica. It has been regularly published since 1988, covering the field of social sciences and history in the spirit of interdisciplinary research. Currently, it publishes 4 issues per year, with about 4 to 5 articles in each issue. JSSP is a peer-reviewed journal and is indexed in the first tier of the Taiwan Social Science Citation Index, TSSCI, and academic databases of EBSCO. It is praised as one of the best social science journals published in Taiwan. This workshop invited the best scholar in the field of EU-East Asia study to deal with the relevant interdisciplinary issues. I believe it will inspire every participant to have a deeper understanding and then make feedback to the papers. It will be great if your best interdisciplinary work can be accepted by JSSP of the best interdisciplinary journal. Finally, I would like to welcome you again and wish you a successful presentation today and tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Du, and I think you will have another meeting, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, sorry, I forgot to open my video.
That's okay, but I suggest that we can have a group photo right now, and then because Professor Du would like to participate another meeting. So could you, may I invite you open your camera and then have a group photo. Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, already open.
Ping Yi, could you help us to have a group photo? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we follow your order, okay? Yeah.
And
Is it okay?
some teachers haven't opened their camera.
May I invite all the participants open your camera, your webcam, and then we can have a group photo. Thank you very much. Even students should be okay, all right? Okay, thank you, please. Yeah. It's okay? Okay. Oh,
Okay, I take a picture. Thanks everyone.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And now we invite Professor Bartison, the UGent from University Ghent, and the guest editor of the Journal of Social Science and Philosophy, to give us opening remark. Let's welcome Professor Bartison. Yeah, Professor Bart, please. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jun. Good morning to all of you. Good early morning here in continental Europe, and good afternoon to you all in faraway Taipei, or wherever you may be, or in Shanghai. I see also some people joining in from Shanghai. So yes, the idea related to this workshop is indeed that we would come to a publication in a special issue of the Journal of Social Sciences and Philosophy, which is, as my colleague said, a interdisciplinary journal, which then, of course, is perfectly fit for the content of our workshop. As you have noticed on the program, we have contributions today and tomorrow on a variety of topics, cultural topics, geopolitical topics, economic, historical, and so on. So, but of course, all related to the same issue, EU, East Asia, a relational perspective, which is, I would say, also a very timely topic, given developments on the international scene, both with respect to normative issues, economic issues, international relations issues. A relational perspective is the title we have chosen for the workshop, which is I would say not too new, but still a quite new approach indeed to international relations, related also, or an approach that is not alien to also social sciences in general, where countries, regions are seen as social actors. And I think that in many of the papers we will have in the during these 2 days, this will indeed be a common feature that we try to understand how indeed there is in international relations something as perceptions, something as action and reaction, and so on. So I do think that the variety of topics and papers we will be having has sufficient quality and quantity as to come to a joint publication. At the end of the workshop, tomorrow afternoon, that will be here, tomorrow night in Taipei, Jun will also give some more practical details, but of course we will in time send you deadlines, style sheets, and whatever you may expect from making a joint publication. But for now, I would say I wish you all a very fruitful 2 days, enriching 2 days, and it would have been so nice to meet in person, either here in Ghent or in Taipei. But for the time being, it is what we have to live by. So thanks for being here, and looking forward to hearing your papers and later on to reading your papers. Back to you, Ko-Jun.
Thank you, Professor Bart. And in fact, we had the idea, and then 1 year in Taipei and the other year in Ghent or in Belgium. And then I really hope that maybe next year we can have another EU East Asia Relation conference or workshop in Ghent or in Brussels or in Belgium. This we hope that yeah, we can continue our academic communication and exchange. Okay, and now we expect to start our first section at 2:30 p.m. in Taipei, but now it's still some time available. So I think some participants just join us. So may I ask you open your webcam again, and then we can have a new group photo again. Okay. And Ting, is it okay?
Yeah, I will have a shot now. And 3, 2, 1, smile. Okay, thank you.
And maybe we'll just follow our schedule, and then we will start our first section at 2:30 p.m. So let's take a break, and then we will start our first section. And the chair of the first section is Professor Dr. Zhou Jiachen, the President of International Affairs, College of Social Science, NTU, and then we have three. The first section, the chair is Professor Bart Deason, and then we have three paper presentation. So maybe we just take a break, and then we will start at 2:30. Thank you. Yeah, let's take a break. Thank you.
Time for us to have a morning coffee and for you to have an evening tea.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
Hello, I would like to invite you to come back, and we invite Professor Partison to start the section 1, culture and normative issue. And this section will be presented by Professor Partison and Professor Lai Yunchen and Professor Liu Jiahao. So, Bart, please. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jean, and welcome back to all of you. First session indeed is on cultural and normative issues. And I see that indeed, as a chair, I have also the privilege to open this session and in this sense, of course, to open the workshop. Now, as I am indeed the first speaker, and I think it's kind of, or might be kind of interesting to have a historical perspective on normativity and cultural values. And this is also the way in which I have conceived my contribution. It's a contribution, I would say, that is based on my own reflections on the normative role of the European Union and how this normative role has developed and may, who knows, at this point, at this juncture in time, be questioned. And I do think that it is important also that if we question something, that we also question ourselves. So this is a little bit a perspective, the relational perspective, from which I will do my contribution. And now I will try to share my screen. Just a minute. Yes. So I have called my paper EU Normative Power and Cross-Strait Relations, and I have made 4 topics. I will go into the EU as normative power, some historical reflections, then the issue of being a norm, pretending to be a norm, and being accepted to be normative. So this is what I will deal with in norm setting and norm taking. And then I will go into the issue of the European Union as a normative power in cross-strait relations. And then I will try to make a reflection on how we can proceed towards the future, what the possible role of the European Union as a normative power may be. So if I first look into the EU as normative power from a historical perspective, then I would like to go back in time with my historical perspective to the early 19th century. The early 19th century, which is of which an important milestone, let's say, was the Congress of Vienna in 1815. So at the end of the 7 coalition wars that raged in Europe from the 18th century, late 18th century, until the Congress of Vienna. The Congress of Vienna, presided by Clemens von Metternich, that had at its aim to redraw the borders between the European countries, so as to make sure that types of war as we had the 7 coalition wars would be no longer possible, and because the redrawing of the intra-European borders would bring the power of the European forces in balance. And if they were in balance, of course, then the risk and that war would be raging again was thought to be made impossible or diminished. We, of course, do know that in the 19th century this proved to be untrue. But anyway, that is the situation we had in the Congress of Vienna. And assessing the Congress of Vienna, sorry, I will just take my watch with me so that I see that I don't go over my time. If you look at the Congress of Vienna, we have seen different assessments of that. And one of them was by the famous Hans Morgenthau, who back in 1948 said that the outcome or the outcome of the Congress of Vienna was that the European countries decided that rather, and this of course refers to this balance of the redrawing the European intra-European borders, that the general idea conviction was that they would no longer take up arms against another great power, but of course that their technological and military, which is concomitant to that superiority, would give them the possibility to expand into the politically empty spaces of Africa and Asia. And of course, we all know that this has been very important in the period of colonization. Another assessment of this same Congress of Vienna was made by Kimberly Hutchings in 2008, in which she said, her assessment was that the importance of the Congress of Vienna was that it gave the possibility for European countries to go over to a gradual reproduction of all parts of the world in the image of the West. This, if they would not do that, it would be the other possibility, which of course was the unwanted possibility, would be that they would themselves descend into irrationality. And so the rational idea, the technological, scientific idea was that Europe was the norm, and being the norm, that they had the right, in a sense, to reproduce their ideas in the rest of the world. And I would say that if you look at contemporary changes on the international or developments on the international scene, that this is an idea that is still present. If you look at Afghanistan, one can say maybe the Afghanistan question we are facing at the moment is once again a sign that this is not so self-evident, of course, that probably Europe is not the norm. But anyway, in her assessment of the Congress of Vienna, this is what Kimberly Hutchings stated. In the sinological world, we have the very famous specialist on science and technology in China, Joseph Needham, who in 1955 stated that the technological revolution in Europe became the technological model for the rest of the world, and that concomitant with that, if the rest of the world was taking over Europe as the model for scientific developments, that then almost automatically, apparently, in the minds of Europeans at that time, the idea arose that then, well, the rest, cultural issues, political issues, would also be taken over by the rest of the world. So through the technological development, through the economic development that is also linked to this technological development, the military development, and so on, as norm, European norm, and that this would automatically also expand into other fields of, let's say, human life, and that indeed the world would be shaped after the European model. This idea, of course, is obviously, I would say, has been criticized. And I here have an assessment by Shu Mei, who writes about, or whose field of study is modernity and the modernity issue. And she states that typical for what I have just explained is that the application of the term cosmopolitanism is by definition asymmetrical, depending on the position of the subjects in question. When applied to the third world intellectuals, cosmopolitanism implies that these individuals have an expansive knowledge constituted primarily by their understanding of the world, which is the West, but when applied to metropolitan Western intellectuals, there is a conspicuous absence of the demand to know the non-West. And I think that this, I would say, in German, leider, this is pity, but still very often the case, that we are, that even European institutions, and now we have in Europe also this morning in the newspaper, there was a article in my newspaper, or one I read, an article about the high necessity of decolonizing university curricula in Europe. So it is still something that is very much present, and of which we are, of course, increasingly aware that this was a 19th century attitude. Now, if you look at this, and it's very strange, if you look at China also China in the late imperial period, in the Republican period, we see that indeed many intellectuals indeed accepted Europe as the norm, and the whole idea of the Chinese nation state was also based indeed on Europe as normative power. This also, of course, means that Europe, in a sense, was confirmed in its idea that it indeed was the norm, and that Europe was the norm setter, and that indeed the rest of the world was the norm taker. These dynamics, I would say, have enhanced each other. But this, once again, is no self-evidence. It is not something self-evident. We do know, of course, that after the Second World War, that Asian and African countries started to decolonize, started to speak for themselves, and I just mentioned, to the extent that now in European universities there is the narrative of decolonizing the curricula. This decolonization movement has also, I mean, from the time frame, is also the period, of course, you're in the 60s with the decolonization movement, is also the moment of European integration through the European, well, the first, of course, the European community of coal and steel, and then to what you're having now, Europe of 27, a gradual process. But this peaceful integration of Europe, despite, I would say, European colonial, quote unquote, for some, I mean, quote unquote, in the sense, of course, some countries were European colonies, others were semi-colonial. So despite this history, this European history in the rest of the world, it may be that European peaceful integration, as we have known it after the Second World War, gradually that came along with the decolonization movement in Asia and Africa. I mean, they were also concomitant to each other, has maintained probably Europe in its position of a normative power as the norm setter, peaceful integration. And we can also, for the Asian context, for instance, refer to the ASEAN countries, and the ASEAN countries who are also, for some respects, or in some respects, seen as following, taking the European integration indeed as a norm. Or if you look at the different economic collaboration agreements that are made between different countries also in Asia or in Africa, and that this is, of course, in some sense resembling the economic integration of Europe. So in a sense, one could say, one could see that Europe was maintained and easily accepted, of course, for itself to remain a norm setter, not a norm taker. The 21st century, however, and I will finish my historical reflections in the 21st century. The 21st century is, I would say, kind of reversing this issue. And this is, I would say, both an internal and an external development. Internal, and I will come to that, I would say that it's a reflection that the age of neoliberalism, well, it started, of course, neoliberalism in the 20th century, but the effects of it have become very much visible in the 21st century, that neoliberalism has probably undermined Europe as being a norm setter, and that on the other hand, combined with that, the tremendous rise of Asia and also of some African countries has changed power positions. If I started out in the 19th century with the technological and economic and military power of Europe, of European countries, then of course we do know that technological, military and economic developments in Asia and in some countries of Africa are indeed challenging this position of Europe, and so related to that, undermine or may undermine the position of Europe as a normative power. In this sense, I have a quotation by a sinologist philosopher, Ralph Weber, who stated that in a sense, whereas the order of Europe has been a constant topic for Europeans and non-Europeans alike throughout the ages of discovery and colonialism, Europe has seldom been fashioned as the other itself, not to itself, but to others. Europe as the other of its others. Europe, what Europe is, what Europeans are, is, I would say, no longer determined by the Europeans themselves. It is as much determined by other countries, regions, cultures, people, and so on. Okay, and so I come to the whole issue of norm setting and norm taking. Well, I have here a very long quotation. I will not read it out. It's I have taken it from an article that will be published in the next issue of Asian Studies, in which I write about what I call the myth of a collective China. But what I contend here is that there is, if you look historically on how Europe has developed, that there is a relation, an intricate relation between economic and democratic developments. And there is also a study made for Latin America, published in 1988 by Larry Diamond and Juan Lins, confirming this, that as economic developments are growing, that also democratic developments go hand in hand, and that the one is dynamic towards the other, and that more democracy also leads to more economic development, and that more economic development also leads to a growth of democratic principles. And this was also famously analyzed and suggested by Randall Perenboom in 2007. And Randall Perenboom, and this is also in the same book, 2007, says that this will also be true for China, that when China will grow economically more powerful, that then democracy will come in. Now, the question is indeed, is this so straightforward? Is this indeed so straightforward that economic developments lead to democracy and democracy leads to economic developments? This is the question. And this is, of course, if you look at Europe as a normative power, I have already referred to the European Union as a peaceful integration movement, as a democratic movement. So this, of course, also questions or puts to the question in how far the EU is still a normative power, given, and I referred to it already, that neoliberalism, and this is what I contend in this very long passage and in this article, that neoliberalism is now 21st century, and we see it all around in Europe and transatlantic, that neoliberalism as an economic powerhouse, let's say, or a power system, is gradually undermining democracy, and that we see populism rising, that we see non-democratic parties gaining influence, that we have the whole problem and the democratic problem with fake news, how fake news is undermining true facts and is in the end also undermining democracy. So there is, I would say, within the economic developed world, which is, let's say, traditionally the powerhouses of the US and of Europe, and there is apparently not this straightforward connection between economic development and democratization any longer. And this, of course, also brings in the possibility for other societal organizational systems to propose alternative models. And in this sense, of course, we can see that, for instance, China is, with the China model as a concept, is indeed increasingly portraying itself as the way forward for developing countries. And of course, one of the elements in the narrative concerning that is the colonization and the decolonization, that is, this is already older, of course, that's already also in the 60s or in the 50s even. We see that China is supporting ideologically the decolonization movement. But of course, now that China has become an economic powerhouse as well, we see that there is a growing cloud of China in all domains, all kinds of domains, and that the attractiveness of this model is being portrayed. And so this, of course, coupled with, as I said, the negative effects for in the political domain political domain, sorry, of neoliberalism diminishes the role or a possible role, or threatens to diminish the possible role of the European Union as a norm setter. How does that relate now to cross-strait relations? Few ideas also on that. We do see that that Europe is traditionally a very diplomatic partner in cross-strait issues. With which I mean that Europe has, for economic reasons, basically always upheld the One China principle, because this is, of course, beneficial for maintaining economic ties, I would say, with both sides of the Taiwan Strait. So in this sense, Europe does not take a position in that. And it is also not my duty to take a position in this at this point. But this is what Europe has been doing, a very low profile, let's say, on political issues, but so to maintain good economic relations, both with or with both sides of the Taiwan Strait. The growing clouds of mainland China, also economically, we see that this is, for instance, also spilling into the Russian initiatives, for instance, in Central Asia, where also there is the development of the East Asia, of the Eurasian, Economic Union, and mainland China trying to fuse in the BRI and the Belt and Road Initiative with the Eurasian Economic Union. So looking at how difficult the relations of the European Union with Russia are, we can of course refer to the Crimea issue, we can refer to the dependence of Europe on energy sources from Russia and from Central Asia. This has again changed the dynamics, and we do indeed see that from the European Union, and there are, or from member states of the European Union, there are changes in the rhetoric concerning the cross-strait issues. And we can, for instance, mention that since 2019 and the Europe-Taiwan dialogue on human rights in this respect. So we do see that the role of the European Union, or that European Union, is probably getting gradually more aware of the fact that upholding its own democratic system, countering populism, countering extreme parties, and so on, is not only important for its own, to be loyal to oneself, but that is also only when being loyal to oneself that it can remain a norm setter in political issues, and not be a role that would then not be diminished. And this may indeed give new dynamics also with respect to cross-strait relations. I will end. I see that my time is running out, with a few reflections on the way forward. And I think I have one quote here from another of my good friends, Gustav Gerhardt, who indeed also perceives that the economic systems in the world are growing, in a sense, towards each other. And we do see that climate issues, that the current COVID crisis and so on, have started or have initiated new reflections on economic development. So while he says, while Europe is getting more modern in a sense, in the sense of economic development, we see that other regions in the world are going in the other way, and so there may be a way ahead there. That we find each other, and that indeed Europe can maintain its role as a norm setter. I would like to end here with referring to one other concept, which will be brought in also, I guess, probably tomorrow. It's a concept that was used by Jasper Roptus, who in a policy paper of last year mentioned the concept of principled pragmatism. And I think this is a very nice concept for the way ahead. Principled in the sense, indeed, EU should be loyal to its own normativity so that it can remain a norm setter, but it will also have to go ahead pragmatically. And one good case would probably indeed be the whole issue and the growing tensions we are now having in cross-strait issues. And with these reflections, I will stop here. I do not know, Kwojun, I guess we just go over to the second speaker and then have probably some questions, remarks at the end of the session, or how did you plan it?
Yeah, I thank you, Bart. I think we invite the second presenter, Professor Dr. Lai Yunzhen, to make her presentation. And the title of the presentation is The Factor of Normative Power in the EU-China CAI Comprehensive Agreement Investment, right? Okay. Yes. So, Professor Lai, please.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, so do you see my, just a moment. So
That's
do you
perfect.
see?
Thank you. Yes, it's perfect.
Yeah, do you see my screen now yet?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So, good afternoon, dear friends, dear colleagues, and also dear students. My name is Yunchen Lai. I'm the associate professor from National Donghua University from Department of PA. And today I'm really very happy to have this opportunity to discuss my studies with you. And actually, I think Professor Dyson has provided us a very good start to provide us many very important information about the norms, why the norms is so important to Europe. And in my session, in my discussion, I would like to focus on much more pragmatic, just like you have said, much more empirical studies on the EU-China CAI. I will take EU-China CAI as a case study to see how important is the normative factors play in EU's foreign policies. So the topic today I would like to share is the normative factors in the systematic rivalry and the EU-China CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. Well, actually, the study I want to share with you today is actually only a part of my analysis, which want to be submitted after our conference to the JSSP. And the thesis I plan to submit will call Contradiction and the Convergence of Systematic Rivalry and the EU-China CAI. And the idea of these studies I want to explore whether the newly developed idea of EU, the so-called systematic rivalry, which is developed in 2019, really reflected in its new China policy, in its negotiation with the EU-China CAI. So I want to see whether these two concepts actually does there any contradiction between these two concepts, or actually they convergent to each other? So this is why I want to study in my why I want to know in this study. So the basic framework of the study would be like in the first part, I would introduce an analytical framework, which is very coincidentally corresponds to Professor Dyson's conclusion citation from Professor Girait's his study in 2019. And in the second part and the third part, I will focus on the empirical study to define the idea or to explore the idea of a strategic partner and the systematic rivalry, as well as the case study EU-China CAI. In the first part, I will try to use the analytical framework built up in the first section to explore the empirical data I gathered to see the convergence and the contradiction of the systematic rivalry and the CAI, and finally comes the conclusion. But actually, this thesis is still under development, so I haven't finished it yet because I think we still have some time, right? So today, So today I will focus on the former part about the analytical framework, and I will show you the empirical data I have gathered so far, and maybe later we can have some discussion and you can provide me some suggestion about how could we apply those empirical data to the analytical framework. Okay, so the analytical framework to explore to study the EU-China relationship. Actually, I think when we are talking about a relationship, it's really difficult to say they are in a conflicting relationship or they are in a cooperative relationship. Whether no matter it is the EU-China relationship, EU-US relationship, and so on. So I think a better description is that we try to use a spectrum between conflicting and the cooperative, and actually every kind of a relationship, they are moving on this spectrum. Some elements would make them conflicting, but some element will make them cooperative. So when we are going to see the variation, maybe we discuss whether the factor recently, the important factor to the relationship recently is much more conflicting one or the cooperative one. And how then next question is how should what's the factors influence the conflicting or the cooperating, the moving on the spectrum? I think we can derive two line of thinking from IR theory. The one line of the thinking is the power-based logic, and the other one I will call it transformative logic. And this idea is actually come from the study from Professor Drake, and I think his study could help me to build up kinds of the framework, and we can locate different factors into this kind of the structure, and then we can see the variation of the relationship. So the logic of power is mainly based on the realist logic, the viewpoint from IR theory. It's believed that under anarchy, it's difficult for both parties to get out of power politics and the conflicts of interest. Therefore, the exchanges in EU-China relations are affected by the relative power status of the two parties. And as to the transformative logic, it actually this logic derives from neoliberalism and the social constructivism, and it believes that rules and the shared norms can build mutual trust, and the socialization of both parties can greatly reduce relative conflicts of interest of the power logic. So actually they are kinds of linked to each other, and therefore the permanent cooperation between the two parties could be possible if we these two parties interact under the transformative logic. And when the two sides, I mean the two parties interact mainly with the logic of power, then the two sides tends to be more conflicting. And if the two sides interact with each other mainly on the logic of the transformation, then the two sides tend to cooperate. Then what's the factors under the power logic, and what are the factors under the transformative logic? Actually, the logic of a power can be observed from distribution of global power and the the economic strengths or the so-called economy security dilemmas. For example, if China's position in the global policy getting higher and higher, this would make the European Union much more suspicious and concerned about the rise in China, then it's much likely EU will take a more conflicting policy. And this logic applies the same to the economy stress. If the China's economy's power become too powerful, then it will make China, the EU very suspicious. But you will also ask like, sometimes the economy stress does not necessarily mean like conflict. For example, United States and Europe, they are both powerful economy power, but they do not conflict with each other so much, right? So actually, economy strength is also possible linked brings the institutional cooperation, such as the CAI, I want to discuss. So if there are many institutional settings between the two parties, then it is very plausible to imagine that maybe these two parties will become much more cooperative. And another very important part of the transformative logic is the norms, which I feel most interesting in, and this is what our session want to discuss on. So if the two parties are very similar in the norms, then maybe their relationship, we can say that it's much more possible to have some cooperation. So I will majorly focus on the discussion of the norms in my following session. Okay, and here I want to provide you some basic information, which you have already know. I just go quickly through it. So we know that in recent years, China has increased its authoritarian and its foreign policy attitude turn more and more tougher. So the European Union is very disappointed by China's failure to deliver on its commitment to a level playing field in trade and in investment. And another external factor is the US factor, which is United States foreign policy towards China, and the tension between United States and China force European must to express their position in this ever-changing geopolitical environment. So in this kind of the global context, global setting, many EU agencies and industries and associations, they have a command in this new reality and urges the European Union to do something to deal with the rise in China. So for example, the Netherlands and Sweden, they have recently published a strategic paper on China to express their concern. And many business associations, for example, VDMA, Business Europe, Confindustria, they urge this commission to take some actions. And among all business associations, I think the most important report is published by BDI, the German business association, which is called "How Do We Deal with China's State Control Economy?" And in this policy paper, or in this paper, actually this association define China kinds of rivalry, and this kind of stance is reaffirmed by EU Commission's new policy paper in 2019, which is called EU-China Strategic Outlook. And in this policy paper, actually Commission describe China as triple rule settings, including negotiating partner, economic competitor, and systematic rival. And this is a very big change, or this means a lot, because we know since 2003, the EU has tried to establish the so-called strategic partnership with China, and this effort was reaffirmed in 2013 to say they want to continue the construction of the strategic partnership. But 6 years later, that is not so long, right? Only 6 years later, we see there is so big changes in EU's policy or EU's perception. Even though the EU still consider China as an important negotiating partner or economic competitor, but this is the first time that EU used such strong wording, systematic rival, to describe China. So I think this marks a very big policy variation, or we say critical juncture. Yeah, so what does the EU want to do to deal with China? actually Commission proposed 10 actions towards China, and it urges European Council to ratify this kind of a proposal. Those actions including strengthen cooperation with China, human rights, peace and security and development, press China to peak its emission in line with the Paris Agreement, deepen engagement on peace and security, promote international standards in connective strategies. I will not go into every one of it, but but if you have a quick look, you will find that EU's ambitions or EU's objectives towards China is actually are actually very various. For example, in the item 1, it mentioned human rights, it mentioned peace, it mentioned security, and it mentioned development all in the same time. So it seems like that EU had the focus of the EU is not so clear. But if we look into the detail of these 10 actions, I think we can try to distinguish those 10 actions into a category like this one. So in this category, I find that actually EU's objectives towards China could be categorized or could be attributed to 5 different goals, including fair trade, security, sustainable development, human rights, and technological sovereignty. And from this distinguishment, we can firstly see that trade and the economy is the first concern of the European Union. So we see 5 different actions involving with the fair trade. And this brings the conclusion of discussion, only discussion, the negotiation of the EU-China CAI in the next year. And besides of the fair trade, norm is also an important concern of the Europe. Yeah, so just as Professor Dyson has said, that norm means a lot to the Europe, so it also reflects in its Chinese policy. Why do I say that? Because you said these 5 goals, 2 of them, sustainable development and human rights, this is the norms. They are the norms. They are the norms that you want to promote. And the 4 different actions, the item 1, item 2, item 3, and item 7, all mention about the norms. Yeah, so in general, so we can see that economic interest is EU's concern, but in the same time, the EU also, it seems like the EU also want to do something on the norms, on its actions, on its Chinese policy. Okay, so this is the policy paper, the general setting of the EU. What does the EU say? I want to do something. I want to do something. I want to do something. But this is only EU want to do something. So I think next we should see, does the EU actually do something for this? So let's see the action that EU has taken since 2019, since its announcement of the systematic rivalry. So first is about the norm. What does the EU do on the sustainable development, the climate cooperation? In general, the EU and China has cooperated to advance international climate and biodiversity negotiation aimed at reducing the carbon emissions. And the European Union also plans to launch the European Green Deal and strive to incorporate sustainable economic policy into its new policy, the next generation of the European Union. So it seems like climate cooperation is a part that EU and China doing well, do not have so much conflicts, but actually, there are still some friction between EU and China. Major is about the design of the CBAM certificates. The EU has announced the CBAM certificates mechanism to require foreign exporter while they want to import their products into the European Union, such as some fossil or some other steel something, then they need to buy the CBAM certificate to contribute to the control of the carbon emission, and they also need to report their emission while producing those products. So China is quite unsatisfied with this kind of mechanism. So it criticized CBAM, calling it as a climate unilateralism. CBAM is not yet taken into force. In plan, it were taken into forces in like 2 years in 2023. So, but so this remains a point to be observed whether this kind of the friction would make EU-China relationship getting much more conflicting. And another important norm is human rights. So the EU and China has established the EU-China Human Rights Dialogue, which provides a forum for the EU to raise concerns with China on a regular basis. But after more than 30 dialogues, the frequency and the level of the dialogue actually have been reduced, and the results are quite limited. So in 2020, the European Union established a new human rights mechanism called Global Human Rights Sanction Regime, which allows the European Union to impose punitive measures such as travel bans or freezing of funds. And this later bring very big friction between EU and China. We will talk about it later. And how about the fair trade? How about the economic part? What the EU has actually has done so far? Well, we know EU has a huge trade deficit with China, and the EU is quite concerned with China's increasingly using economic coercion to seek political gains. So the EU, to change this disadvantagement, the EU has tried to negotiate on the Comprehensive Investment Agreement, the CAI, and constructed the EU FDI review framework, reform of international procurement instrument, and conducted trade policy reviews and promote open strategic autonomy. And among those 4 actions, I think the first one and the second one are very important. But the second one, the construction of the EU FDI review framework, is worldwide. It's not only aimed at China. It's not only focusing on China. And as my study want to explore the variation of EU-China relationship, then I think I will focus my latest study on the discussion of the CAI. Okay, so some basic information for the CAI, the Comprehensive Agreement on Investment. This agreement, this negotiation has started in 2014, and it finished in 6 years in the end of the end of the 2020. And among these 6 years, there is a very important critical juncture. I have mentioned that in the 2019, the EU released the EU-China Strategic Outlook to define China as a systematic rivalry. So even though these negotiations were completed in end of the 2020, in end of the last year, but 3 months later, the EU and the relationship between EU and China getting very tensive due to the human rights issue. So EU and China, they sanction with on each other, and this brings that the EU Parliament actually now frees the ratification of the CAI in May. Okay, so the ratification will be a problem of the CAI in the future. But before we think about whether this ratification is possible and what does it mean after the treaty is ratified, I think it's very important to have a look on what have they actually agreed, what is the actual contents of the EU-China CAI. So the key element of the CAI, I would say that there are 3 pillars. The first pillar is the improvement of the market access, and the second pillar is the improvement of the level playing field, and the third pillar is the promotion of sustainable development. And I will focus my analysis, my evaluation on the third pillar, the sustainable development, because it's much related to the norms we want to discuss about. Okay, so when we want to evaluate this agreement, I think there are 3 important guiding questions. The first guiding question is we should see what has actually been considered by either side in terms of openings or for investment, and under what terms. And the second guiding question is what guarantees are made for implementation of the various concessions on the CAI. And the third one, and a very important one, is how binding these commitments are. Is they just a tongue talking? Is it just talking, or it's just a paper for work, or you can really see something from this commitment? Okay, so before we evaluate it, I will provide some facts about the sustainable development session. In the treaties, there are many provisions to a specific tailored implementation mechanism to increase degree of transparency and participation of civil society. And also both parties agree to make their companies to uptake corporate social responsibility, the so-called CSR. And there are also the mention about the implementation of the Paris Agreement in this treaty. And there are also specific commitment on the International Labour Organization Convention, Article 29 and 105. So basically, the CAI, this agreement binds the parties into a value-based investment relationship grounded on sustainable development principles. So norms such as labors and the environment are mentioned because the CSR related to this one, and the Paris Agreement is the commitment is about the commitment on environment and climate, and also the ILO is about the labor rights. So it seems like that EU has gained something, has obtained something through this kind of the agreement, because first of all, the CAI is considered the first agreement that China delivers obligation on sustainable development. Because in other international agreement of China with other international actors, China never agreed to make any commitment on the sustainable development. But in the CAI, China has made the new international commitment to pursue the ratification of the fundamental ILO conventions, just as I have said. But CAI actually still being highly criticized in the European society. So, and is the terms under sustainable development being often criticized by the European media and the civil society. Then why? If Europe really gained something, then why people criticize it so much? I think the major problems are the vague wording, the enforcement problem, and the commitment. So for the vague wordings, the provision of the CAI says that the treaty reaffirms the parties' right to regulate, requires parties to strive to ensure laws provide for a high level of environment. So you see, strive means that you make an effort, but you do not make a commitment to deliver something, to get something, to provide the outcome. And the high level, how could we measure high level? How high is high, or how high is not high enough? So this kind of the vague wording make this provision like statements of principle, and the wording make it very hard to be enforced. And another problem is the enforcement. Actually, if we see the enforcement provision, then you will find that it's highly dependent on parties' own national law. For example, it says require the parties not to waive or derogate from their own environmental or labor law, or fail to effectively enforce these laws as a way to encourage investment. So of course, it seems like that this is much more enforceable than the previous one, because it says, well, the standard is your national law. You have some specific standard now, but the problem is, when you use your own national law as the standard, if your standard is not so high, then these provisions make nonsense, right? So even more, this provision is more enforceable, but the effectiveness still depends on the national law. And the provision also said that the treaty reaffirms the parties' right to regulate, require parties to strive to ensure blah, blah, blah. And when you say right to regulate, implies that you admit the parties, the nation can have their own policy. They have a right to control their own internal affairs. So the highly dependence on the national law make people question about its effectiveness. And then the other one is about the commitment. In the provision, it said work towards to ratify all fundamental ILO. It only said work toward, but it do not say require. So if you can just say, I have tried, but it's difficult, then okay, then it's finished. So it would be not so enforceable. And also it said the ratification commitment is establish best effort obligation. Again, best effort. How do we define best? So actually, for a normal agreement, you should have a definite deadline to ratify it, or for a very specific schedule. But in CAI, we do not see it. Okay, so here I want to provide my not conclusion, a very I will stop here, but I will share my viewpoints with you so far. So I think CAI is now in danger from both ends. For European side, it is very hard to persuade the European Parliament to ratify the agreement, while some of MEPs are still sanctioned by China, and this is due to the normative issue. And for China's side, under today's political atmosphere, it's very easy to imagine that China would not be so enthusiastic to push the treaty to be ratification. And so whether the European Parliament will ratify the CAI and whether the treaty will ever come into force remains to be seen. Okay, so I will stop here, just 30 minutes to finish my part. Yeah, so thank you very much for your attention. Maybe we can have some discussion later.
Thank you, Professor Lai. That was very nice. Indeed, I mean, in Europe, we are indeed discussing a lot on the CAI and its feasibility, and it complements nicely to my general introduction as a contribution. And I do think, I mean, it was one of the, just a very short still remark is when you mentioned, so one of the measures that is used in Europe is fund freezing. Indeed, I mean, I think it also works within Europe. I think, as I said, to be a norm or to be accepted as a norm, you have to live up to your own normativity. And we do see, for instance, that and there has been a big issue with Poland within the European Union and the restriction of LGBTQ plus rights. And funds have been frozen also within Europe, living up to their own normativity. And we do indeed see that it does have an effect. So some regions in Poland have now revised their policies. So I do think indeed that this normativity thing also comes very nicely in your paper. From both sides, as you said. I mean, it's always from both sides. I think it's a very, very interesting paper. Thank you. And with this, we come to the third paper, which will be given by Professor Liu Jiahao. And the title of the paper is of National Taipei University. And the title of the paper is Redefining Sovereignty, a non-corporate study of European Union's political power. Professor Lai, the floor.
Very much, Professor Daising and Professor Lai, and thank you for Professor Ye, his invitation. I don't know whether you can see the paper I just showed.
All is perfect, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, I just make it enlarge a bit. Actually, I think it's very good arranged, I think, for me. Like after Professor Daising and Professor Lai's presentation, we come to a topic more related to conceptual, issue. And my start point from this short piece of paper actually is also related to a kind of external relationships of European Union with its foreign partners and maybe potential rivals. Because as I will show, like we can see, this is what French President Emmanuel Macron, he gave a speech at the Sorbonne University in 2017. And I believe this, this content of this speech has become a kind of start point for some scholars to discuss with, I think, especially in relation to a kind of topic in relation with the European sovereignty. So I just quote a very brief part of his speech that I just read through a bit. Like he said, only Europe can, in a world, guarantee genuine sovereignty or our ability to exist in space war to defend our values and interests. European sovereignty requires contracting, and we must do it. Why? Because what contracts and forge our profound identity, this balance of values, this relation with freedom, human rights, and justice cannot be found anywhere on the planet. This attachment to a market economy, but also social justice. And this part is actually related to the United States of America and mainland China, I believe. We cannot blindly entrust what Europe represents on the other side of the Atlantic or on the edges of Asia. It is our responsibility to defend it and build it within the context of globalization. So, based on his speech, there's some discussion in scholars whether there are a kind of European sovereignty we can explode and expand. And this kind of issue actually is a very lasting issue for the past several decades in Europe, I believe. And but this speech Macron he gave, I think is point out one important factor when we're talking about sovereignty, that is the external dimension of sovereignty, especially in this kind of globalization, society or context we live in now. So this part actually I think is more related to what the two professors just gave our a very good presentation. Like we can see from the relationship between EU and China, or EU and US, there are a kind of changes we can see from their relationships. And these relationships actually become a challenge to EU. So it's the reason why some scholars and even politicians, they want to address this kind of topic or an idea like European sovereignty is a kind of urgent issue for scholars and even for the peoples live in the European countries. They have to consider about it. So this part is from Macron, and the other part is from the former European Commission President Jean-Jacques. Sorry, this is Russo. It's here. European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker. He gave this speech after Macron's speech. This speech is given in 2018. I just quote a bit because I think his conception of sovereignty is a bit more clear than Macron's, I think. And he gives this following sentence, and he said, like, the geopolitical situations make this European's hour of time coming. The time for European sovereignty has come. It's the time Europe took its destiny into its own hands. It's the time Europe developed what I coined. This is German, so I cannot pronounce this very clear and right, I think, Weltpolitical Weichheit, something like that. The capacity to play our role in shaping global affairs. So this is something about normative power, right? Europe has to become a more sovereign actor in international relationships. European sovereignty is born of member states' national sovereignty and does not replace it. Sharing sovereignty when and where needed makes each of our states and the nation stronger. This belief lies united we stand taller is the very essence of what it means to be part of the European Union. European sovereignty can never be the detriment of others. Europe is a continent of openness and tolerance, and it will remain so. So I think if we can make a very brief comparison between this speech given by Juncker and the one given by Macron, actually, why I say Juncker's speech gave a more clear conception of sovereignty is because first, he gave a kind of image that is the kind of hour my sovereignty had to be a very important issue for European peoples. Also, he mentioned about like European sovereignty is born of member states' national sovereignty. Okay, so and move on from here, like we can see, like he also mentioned that it's about unity, right? It's a kind of unity we can have if the member state we cooperate with each other, so we can build our European sovereignty from this cooperation. And also he gave a very important part in my point of view, like Europe is a continent of openness and tolerance. So I think a bit different from his conception of sovereignty and President Mahomes is like he basically he's trying to give a vision, but also he gives a kind of values why European countries and the European Union can provide to the world, but also to build up its own sovereignty. Okay, but Mahomes, he didn't give light. If we go back to his speech, what he mentioned actually is to guarantee Union sovereignty or our ability to exist in today's world, to defend our value and interest. So it's a subtle thing, right? Because Mahomes also mentioned a kind of European value and interest, but the term he used is to defend these things. So it's different from what Juncker he said. She's trying to. We have to maintain openness. We have to maintain our values. So this is a thing I want to address from here actually, because the traditional conception of sovereignty is more close to what Mahomes he said. Like we have a kind of corporate sovereignty. So I back to this part. Now, I think that most of participants today, we are very familiar with these terms. So I just will go this part very quickly. So I just summarize my understanding of this series of corporate sovereignty. Now, this series actually we can see from, for example, like Thomas Hobbes, his development, he gave a very general account of this conception of sovereignty. So I just show here, like, he basically talking about a conception of state sovereignty, but I think there are some conceptual, elements also can be used when we discuss with the national sovereignty or the popular sovereignty, right? So I just say the three components or factors of sovereignty, I think. One, the first, a democratic procedure by which a state is constituted. And second, a sovereignty, an artificial power by which a state can act, will, and function. So based on this second point, we can see like why we call this kind of theory of sovereignty is corporate, because they conceive a kind of legal fiction, a legal personality, a legal and we will see, and the public personality. As an actor, we can see in this kind of international relationships. And the third element is this sovereign state or the bodily existence indicate like it's occupied a space in a world as its territory. So why? I mean, why President Macron, he will say, well, we have to defend our values and interests. Actually, from my point of view, is because these values and interests actually represent a kind of idea and a kind of way of our living. And this living is what the people who live here, we will have to maintain, actually, to protect them. Okay, so this is a kind of traditional conception of sovereignty, I believe. Like we have a territory, we have value, want to, to maintain and to actualize in this land. So, but I don't think this conception is very, suitable and applicable for us to explain what we are facing, the challenge we just described after the two professors' presentation. Like we have this kind of challenge from the world, from other countries, from mainland China, from the US. Okay, so this is thing I'm trying to redefine the idea of sovereignty, which we can see from President Mahomes, his speech, that it's kind of traditional thing. And actually, there are two papers, and one is this short paper. It's a European Union Institute for Security Studies published, right? I believe you know, like. And this paper actually is published in 2020 July, so it's quite new. And the scholars, the authors of this paper, they give a kind of different idea of what is sovereignty. They say like European sovereignty is actually a kind of strategic sovereignty. in that part, we think, like we just say, a kind of traditional corporate sovereignty. But what is this kind of strategic sovereignty? Okay. Just jump to the pages. I give this summarize what they say to this. Okay, here. Sorry for this because I don't have much time to prepare the PowerPoint, so I just use my paper, okay, to show the text. Okay, we just mentioned, like, right, there is a kind of traditional idea of sovereignty, a corporate conception of sovereignty, and basically it's in relation to, like, we have values, we have norm, we have a way of life, and we want to maintain them in a certain space, our territory, and for our independence. In a way, we can use these terms. But for the scholar who wrote the paper in number 169, they mentioned about this European sovereignty is a kind of strategic sovereignty, and this term, okay. It's basically, we can use this also, Jenna Valerian. He wrote in this issue of Charlotte paper, he mentioned that European sovereignty is a strategic sovereignty which goes beyond security and defense policy and aims to enhance the EU's ability to decide and act in accordance with its own rules, principles, and values. Okay. So European sovereignty is the EU's ability and power to decide and act in accordance with the EU's laws, the principles and values is apparently, from my point of view, is a different idea. That is more, in a way, is also a very well-known definition of sovereignty, like this legal normative, but not corporate conception of sovereignty. Okay. I just jump here because I don't have much time to give very general view about this conception, the legal, normative, and non-corporate conception of sovereignty. But basically, this is an idea we can see from Hans Kelsen, a German law philosopher. He gave this kind of theory, I believe. And but the European strategic sovereignty, as we can see, is the main point of this conception of sovereignty is also related to rules, principles, values, the norms, actually. And based on these norms, we can have different kind of powers for the EU, the European Union, to react, to take their response to different challenges. Okay. But how I can do this? Because I think we all are very familiar with this process about how the EU built on, right? There are treaties, there are norms, there are a lot of laws. So this is a kind of basis for the European Union can use its power, can be instituted. But the strategic sovereignty, this term, this conception, actually give a bit more wider explanation about this situation. Because for this conception, it's claimed like we can make more rules and make more principles, and also we can make more treaties based on our internal relationship with other countries, and we can base on these norms to have a kind of power to promote or to defend, okay, our values and our interests. So in this sense, if we focus on this external dimension about this idea, like it's not just about internal sovereignty, it's also related to external sovereignty, as we just said. I just said, sorry. Like this understanding of sovereignty also mentioned like the treaties of EU's and between EU and its partner, and also maybe potential rivals on that, can also be a kind of justification or a source for the EU to have this sovereign power to defend its value or to promote its value and interest into other regimes in the world. So I call this kind of thing as a kind of interdependence factor, because if you can see on here, like here, I mentioned what distinction the idea of European strategy sovereignty from the legal normative conception of sovereignty is this interdependent factor. Because if we go back to this legal normative conception of sovereignty, just mentioned very briefly, I don't have much time. It's basically it say like the EU, why EU have sovereign power is because we have the laws, the treaties, the norms, like all the member states agree. Okay, so this is why, the reason why the EU has the power inside the continent. Okay. But when we talk about this challenge from outside, and the treaties the EU signed with other partners in other countries, other region, this is a kind of norms actually can give the EU a kind of justification to use their sovereign power to defend or intervene, or as I say, to promote their values in these kind of different regions. It's what we call the normative power in a sense. But why is the point? Why Mahomes or Juncker, they were thinking like this is thing actually a kind of external influence will, in a way, to make some kind of a threat of the independence of EU. This is a part I don't quite agree with them, but I believe this is a kind of treaty that actually empower the EU to use their kind of sovereignty to do something in other regions. So this is what I call the interdependence factor for our understanding of sovereignty. Because when we talk about sovereignty, basically we are talking about independence as a kind of old but still very dominative view, right? But nowadays, I think since we are living in this kind of globalization period, there is no way actually, even mainland China or US, to survive by their own. So it's one of things, like, for example, like President Trump, he made some kind of wrong judgment in my view. But this kind of idea, the interdependence between all the countries, this kind of a way is a new phenomenon for us. I think this is a very important thing to help us to reconsider, to redefine the old conception of sovereignty, as I call the corporate conception of sovereignty. Okay, so this is the thing what I learned from the authors of I just mentioned this paper for the topic of European sovereignty, the kind of idea they propose. And the last thing I want to mention in this brief talk, sorry, I think I give my talk in a quite clear way. It's about this, that when we see there is a kind of interdependent factor for us to reconsider the definition and the nature of sovereignty, actually it's a kind of thing from we usually consider from a polity, from the external part of a polity, right? So, and the norms, the values, the laws we have inside this polity is usually we can say this from a thing is internal. So I want to define or propose a definition of a different conception of sovereignty is what I call, actually we can see from here, sovereignty as conditional power. Okay, so it's because we have this internal condition as a laws and norms and treaties between member states of EU, but we can also have this external condition, like this challenge we face from outside of EU. But there's also a possibility for EU to make, for example, like treaties or other kind of this kind of interrelationship with other countries And based on this kind of formal treaties norms, like they can also to have a kind of political power to influence other countries to impose their values and their norms, their ideas. Okay, so this is a thing that I want to mention that sovereignty, in my view, is not something like the absolute, indivisible, like the very famous by the old definition from Rambutan in 16th century. It's actually a conditional thing. There are two conditions. One is an internal condition. It is from the norms, the laws we have inside the polity. But at the same time, we also can have some norms, treaties, and laws outside the polity. And these norms, internal and external, they both provide a possibility to the polity to use its powers to intervene or to impose their values and interests to other places. So this is basically what I want to propose today. I hope I give a quite clear enough talk to explain my thinking. And yeah, so this is my talk today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Liu, for this for these reflections in the plural on the sovereignty versus interdependence and dependence, and how that it's constantly indeed in the globalized world in which we are, how this is constantly put to the question and has to be redefined. So this brings us at the end of the 3 presentations. We do have some time for a Q&A. I do not know if someone wants to come in, and if you do, maybe switch on your camera that we see who is talking. I do not see any reaction, so I guess we have been very clear. Alternatively, we have been very unclear, but but if all are satisfied, I would say go and have a tea or a coffee or something stronger, and we meet again in at Belgian time 10 minutes past 10. Taiwan time 10 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, and so for the second session, which will be chaired by Zhou Jiajun, a session on geopolitical and security issues. So enjoy your coffees and teas. I guess you will not be able to enjoy a chat live with someone else. This will be for the next occasion. But so see you at 10 minutes past either 10 or 4.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I think time is up. If it's permitted by Professor Ye, then I will start the session. Okay. Okay, so here comes our second session. We have already heard quite a lot of interesting discussions and research on the cultural and normative dimension. So right now we are switching the focus a little bit to more materialist and empirical dimension of the cross-strait relations and also EU and Asia relations. I am Zhou Jiachen, Chelsea Jiachen Zhou, from the Graduate Institute of National Development at NTU. I'm very glad that we have three distinguished papers on the more materialist and economic dimension of this topic. We have Professor Gerke, Professor Chen, and the last paper will be presented by me and Dr. Wang. I guess according to the program, we probably would like to invite Professor Gerke first to do the presentation. Professor Tobias Gerke is a research fellow from the Egmont Royal Institute for International Relations. And he specializes in economic statecraft, national security issues, and geoeconomics issues. And today he's going to present a paper on taming techno-nationalism, assessing the EU policy agenda of technological sovereignty. So let's welcome him.
Thank you, Professor Zhao, for this introduction. Hello, everyone, colleagues in Taiwan and in Europe. Yes, exactly. I wanted to talk about a paper that I recently published last week, actually, together with colleagues in the Netherlands. It's a policy-oriented paper. We try to give policy recommendations to EU and member state policymakers, but I'll try to present sort of the horizontal issues that we discussed in this paper. So as it was said, it's called Taming Techno-Nationalism, and we wanted to assess the EU policy agenda on technological sovereignty. So it fits quite neatly with just the previous discussion by Professor Liu on sort of the conceptual debate around sovereignty in Europe, which is very large. But I'll try to make a bit of a practical addition to this. So I want to talk about three things quickly. First, what is techno-nationalism and what is EU technological sovereignty? Secondly, what policy is the EU advancing in this field? And thirdly, what implications can we draw from these developments for EU-Asia relations more broadly, was the discussion point. So on the first issue, what does techno-nationalism describe? From our point of view, it's a notion that governments become increasingly aware that access to and control over certain emerging technologies is critical in a national security point of view, from an economic competitive point of view, and also from a value-based proposition. And so there's a more zero-sum logic infused into technological policy, as we see across the globe. National governments are trying to expand their control over sensitive technologies and the flow of them in international trade and investment. Of course, the question is, what are these critical technologies in the first place? And that is, of course, a matter of determination by governments. What we observe is that a number of governments are contemplating these questions. Maybe the Americans have been doing that for at least 4 years, since 2017, when the American government introduced notions of emerging technologies and foundational technologies, which they defined as being critical to all these national economic security aspects. But they're still working on actually narrowing down what that means in purpose. Now, of course, some of you might say, this is not anything new. Technologies have always had a security angle. But what's the difference today, I believe, is that the previous regime of the last 20, 30 years was rather narrow. We have in international governance and law and national law clear notions of dual use technologies, which have been mostly quite narrowly defined. Those technologies that have a risk of nuclear proliferation or arms proliferation, those that might be related to human rights violations or terrorist activity. Today, though, these categories of dual use is really breaking up completely and flowing into, as I said, questions of those technologies that might be important for economic competitiveness in the future, but also for defending a certain set of values, as governments phrase it. So I said the Americans, I think, have been on this for at least 4 years to really think about this. Of course, if we look at China and look at industrial plans that have been coming out of China in the last 20 years, there has always been a focus on already defining a specific set of industries and technologies that deserve particular attention from the state. Something that, of course, continues. But also in Europe now, to say that upfront, there's this discussion heavily going on. It's far from done, but the question is, what are our critical technologies? For example, the Commission will set up for the first time an observatory, a specific agency called the Critical Technology Observatory, where it will commit staff. It will develop a methodology, assessment center, if you will, to say, let's analyze what technologies might be important in the future. Are we dependent on them already today? Might we become dependent on them in the future? Or conversely, do we have specific advantages in technologies that might be important to have a look at? And based on these assessments of the center, this should influence then policy down the road. Excuse me. And of course, then you could also ask then what toolkit are techno-nationalist governments pursuing? And in this report, I don't want to go into too much detail here, but we defined specific different measures, different toolkits. We see those government measures that try to transfer technology or know-how. There's different ways you can do this through market-based mechanisms like foreign direct investment, for example. There's legislative mechanisms. There's also forced technology transfer mechanisms, of course. These are most commonly related to China, of course, in the public debate. But there's also, of course, these measures that essentially uneven the level playing field. It can be done through, of course, technical standardization, standard setting. There's all sorts of government support mechanisms, from subsidies to other indirect support mechanisms. And here, of course, this uneven level playing field in this slang, of course, comes also from America. In Europe is the feeling by digital monopolies who are tilting fair competition towards the Americans. European tech sovereignty is framed mostly as a response to essentially what we describe, or many would describe, what is happening in China and America, as a response to these techno-nationalist practices from private US tech giants, but also, of course, from China's more direct government-guided intervention into the economy. And we already heard lots of quotes on sovereignty, on technological sovereignty. There's also a lot of hype, as I said. There's a recent joint paper by Spain and the Netherlands who called on the EU to be more digitally sovereign, to address dependence on foreign technology. There has been a joint manifesto also by France and Germany last year on advancing technological capacity, where they both say we will only succeed if we are the ones creating, developing, and producing new technologies. And yes, President Macron and President von der Leyen speaking at length often about digital sovereignty, technological sovereignty. Macron said, if we don't build our own champions in all areas, digital, AI, our choices will be dictated by others. So you heard in the last panel that these sovereignty and autonomy debates are quite strong. And what's interesting is, of course, that on a level of semantics almost, or on the conceptual level, it's extremely controversial. I think 50% of the people I meet and talk to here in Brussels are quite supportive of the concept, of its notion. The other half, I think, is quite cautious about it, criticizing that this is there are no, but the terminology is first of all very wrong. It's not quite clear what the EU wants to achieve with this terminology. Irrespective of these conceptual debates that we still have, I think what's clear, what's important to underline is that on the policy front, a lot of things are moving and very quickly. And so that brings me to the second part of my talk. What policies are actually advancing in this field? And as I said, there are really, I think, a lot of those policies that we can group under technological sovereignty, because we see a much more active EU, but also active member states who try to more actively govern technological developments and processes by intervening, by supporting, and so on. So I think there's three categories of policies to make sense of it. First are those policies that are aimed to protect EU's innovation capacity. Secondly, there are those policies aimed to promote EU technological capacity. And then thirdly is essentially those ideas to better leverage the rules and standards of the single market, and to better leverage international partners to support the EU's technological agenda. I'll just quickly run through a few of them. So on the protection side, you could of course say, well, the EU has of course always tried to protect fair competition, right? Particularly internationally, strong supporter of World Trade Organization rules, international enforcement, etc. But on the fair competition front, in the last 2 years, the EU has become much more unilateral. It has developed and is developing a range of regulatory tools where it says if we can't enforce our interests and have a level playing field internationally, we have to be able to act unilaterally. There are such things as a foreign subsidy regulation born out of the misery that we cannot really regulate or internationally regulate subsidized companies, particularly from China. There are such things as the international procurement instrument, also out of the need to do something in this field while we can't agree internationally. There's a major digital markets reform, the Digital Markets Act, that is also born out of the desire. Of course, we would rather have international rules, but it's not working. So we have to become more unilateral. There's also these protective tools, though, that are not about fair competition particularly, but that those about ring fencing certain critical infrastructure, critical technologies, and supply chains. Most important, of course, foreign direct investment screening, something that the EU has for the first time adopted in 2019. In brackets, of course, there's a lot of caveats on this. It's far from a harmonized tool at the EU level. It's still up to member states how exactly they screen foreign investments and in which sectors, under which categories. But there has been a first agreement that here the EU has to get better and more coordinated. There's also such a thing as a reform to the export control regime that the EU has in place. Again, in brackets, it's a lot of shortcomings in terms of the Commission has barely any power still. But still, same in critical infrastructure. 5G there have been common guidelines at the EU level. Again, they're not again up to the member states what they do with it. But it's important, I think, despite these shortcomings in these fields for the EU compared to what is maybe happening in America or Japan or China, is that these debates really have accelerated significantly in the last 24 months. And we also witness a somewhat slow convergence. It's slow, but a somewhat slow convergence on this question: what is it actually that is critical in the technological field? Now, we started 2 years ago, essentially thrown into this 5G debate that no one understood in Europe. It came through America, sort of to Europe, and I think the European Union acted a little bit on that, but did not really understand beyond 5G what are other critical technologies that might be risky, where maybe a sort of autonomous policy might be advanced. Today, this debate is definitely already much further. We're currently talking a lot about semiconductor value chain. Where are critical points? It's still an ongoing discussion, but still we're talking about battery value chains and where are critical points. We're talking about raw materials. Are there dependencies? Are there any risks that where the EU needs to intervene? So there's definitely some movement, but maybe much more so on the second policy cluster is the promotional debate. The idea that the EU needs to really increase its own innovation and tech industry capacity is really becoming now quite central to debate. I think tech industrial policy is the catchword here, is moving into the middle of the agenda, specifically on semiconductors. There's huge debate, of course, to what extent Europe can increase its manufacturing capacity and bring back other parts of the semiconductor value chain. There's different instruments that the EU is toying with. It doesn't really have much power in this regard because the EU does not have financial tools or tax tools or anything like that. So it doesn't really have much money to do industrial policy, if you will. But there's definitely a lot of heads coming together. There's one mechanism called Important Projects of Common European Interest, which essentially allows to breach rules of EU state aid. So governments can subsidize certain sectors of the certain industries under specific rules. And they're trying to use that to say, we need more of these lax rules where governments can come in and support strategic technological development. Of course, this comes at the back of the COVID recovery fund, where there's huge amount of money going around that the Commission has made at least somewhat conditional. 20% of it at least is for digital targets. Broad concept, of course, digital projects can be manifold, but there's certainly much more focus of saying, do we not have to commit these to really European technological projects? And there are many other ideas in this field. I don't want to bore you too much. To come to the last cluster is to say the idea that the EU needs to better wield its regulatory power. The traditional portfolio of its strengths, regulation, of course, and many here in Brussels in particular are quite fond of this idea of the EU as a regulatory power. Of course, the EU had quite a success in the last years with its general data protection regulation, the data privacy regulation that were essentially externalized from the EU, and parts of this GDPR, as it's called, are today found in more than 160 legislative texts around the world. It sort of externalized itself through what we call the Brussels effect, and people in Brussels are very fond and believe that they can replicate this effect. That if they are still becoming, if they are first movers in other digital and technological regulation fields, that they can, that these regulations could travel around the world and make the EU a maker rather than a taker in terms of regulation. So there's lots of major regulatory changes really in the pipeline. I think they're quite significant on digital platforms, how to regulate digital platforms. This is, of course, in the single market, how to regulate digital markets. There's major works on competition policy, and there's frameworks on how to regulate artificial intelligence, cloud computing, etc. A lot of lot of drive to drive this debate that the EU is a leader here. Whether, of course, it will be successful that the EU is a leader here is another question. So just sort of a quick horizontal observation that, of course, the really major policy developments, I think, happening that we have to understand as driven by notions of technological sovereignty. Of course, I only gave very brief outlines of these policies. The devil is, of course, in the detail. Many of these policies are either still in the pipeline or have major flaws and gaps, often also dependent on fragmentation of competences in the EU. Many of them, of these technology policies, as soon as they go into the national security dimension, member states retain their competencies, and then there's often a mismatch between Brussels and capitals. Nonetheless, as I said, there's really major developments. Which brings me to my third and last point, sort of a bit of a discussion more, what we can draw from this, or what international partners really also have to draw from this. Because this debate is, I think, very European. It's very much focused in the last 24 months at least. It was very much focused on us, first of all. So it's very unilateral. We have to act, we have to regulate, we have to boost within the single market, we have to protect the single market, etc. And the question, of course, I think for international partners and also us who work in international affairs is what about cooperation with allies? And one promising avenue is, of course, what started yesterday, the Trade and Technology Council with America. It's really a key, it can become a key agenda or platform between the United States and Europe, of course, first of all. But what they want to discuss there is really ambitious. It's essentially tackling all these issues that Europe and also America have been dealing with internally and saying we have to come together and try to talk about tech regulation together. Where is there some sort of common lines? We all have issues about supply chain security. How can we address them together? Even such things as tech industrial policy projects. So how we want to strengthen the semiconductor supply chain, but how can we make sure that our efforts align? There's talks on technical standardization, on competition policy, on digital development. We have to see, of course, where it goes, but I think it's really a immensely forward-looking platform that is a clear break from what happened also in Europe in the last 2 years. As I said, it was quite inward-looking. But of course, one could say this is America and the EU. What about Asian partners? And here I'm a bit more pessimistic, I must say, because yes, we've seen new strategy papers, the EU Indo-Pacific strategy. We might hear about it, of course. We have a connectivity strategy in Europe that was just 2 weeks ago when President von der Leyen gave a State of the Union. She made it one of her key deliverables. She calls it now Global Gateway, sort of as a umbrella for foreign engagement on not only infrastructure development, but also on digital cooperation and regulatory cooperation and so on. But unfortunately, I must say that even though I think this is would be a fantastic opportunity to make to bring a global gateway, a connectivity strategy, make it the umbrella term, it's really unfortunately not really something many here in Brussels or Europe more generally buy into. There's just no interest largely in, or no conception of how we can bring these debates that we have in Europe, all these regulatory issues, all these questions on protecting certain aspects and so on, how we can bring them into foreign policy more comprehensively. Yeah, some good ideas out there. The EU has a connectivity partnership with Japan, for example, the first connectivity partnership that has done. But so far, it's not really comprehensive enough, I think. There is not much talk on digital standards and regulation. There is not much talk on supply chain security or how EU and Japan can together develop deterrence mechanism against techno-nationalist practices. And so I just think it's not really ambitious enough. And other partnerships in this regard are largely missing. There's one with South Korea that is supposed to be coming. It's not really working. The question is, of course, how does Taiwan fit into this framework? There is now one with India that was inked, but again, the focus is not really comprehensive on these technological questions, but often very much on infrastructure development in a traditional sense. So to conclude, I would say, what we are hoping here is that the EU develops this more global technological strategy that can better connect to these domestic sovereignty issues that are not going to go away. And there is a lot of need to act, first of all, in Europe, but to not miss this foreign dimension, and at an early stage already engage close partners in Asia on all these fronts. And we are hoping here that this is forthcoming now, and that there's no new global gateway strategy if it is going to happen next year or this year. But so far, I think we still have to wait. And on that note, I'll stop. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's very informative, and your research really reminds me of a 20 years ago book made by Steve Krasner, and he basically argues that states are doing everything to maintain its sovereignty, and it looks like right now EU is as a whole, as an entity, is also doing the same kind of things, same kind of efforts, and manifests itself in the techno nationalism as you lay out. And in your presentation, you also mentioned the relationship between China and also Taiwan and Japan and South Korea. I think it's nicely linked to the second presenter, which will be done by Professor Chen Weifang from Donghua University, and her paper is on crafting a European vision of the Indo-Pacific strategy, opportunities and challenges. Professor Chen specializes in European institutions and regional integrations. So she is the best person to talk about the EU and Asia relations. So let's welcome Professor Chen.
Thank you, Chair. Also, big thanks to the organizers. Good afternoon, everyone from Europe and Taiwan. I'm Florence from Donghua University. It is my pleasure to join the workshop and to present my paper regarding the EU Indo-Pacific strategy. Before I start, I have to apologize that this paper is not finished yet, so I will only provide primary observations in today's workshop. All the comments are welcome, and also thank you for your kind understanding. Please let me share my PowerPoint. Okay. Here's my PowerPoint. The topic I'm going to share today is crafting a EU version of an integrated Indo-Pacific strategy, opportunities and challenges. As we know that the rise of the Indo-Pacific concept in the last decade has reflected the change of the geo-economic and geostrategic environment. Also, concerning the rising military power of China, economic influence, and the increasing competition between the United States and China in many fields, the Indo-Pacific has become the world's economic and also strategic center of gravity. Although not all EU members are inherently connected to this region, having an integrated and consolidated strategic perspective at the EU level is quite fundamental and indispensable to respond to the change in this region. And we can see that, as we know, to respond to these geopolitical dynamics, this year the EU officially proposed two crucial strategic documents to define its Indo-Pacific strategy. The first one has been adopted in April this year by the Council of the European Union. It is the conclusion on an EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. The other one has been just proposed by the European Commission and the High Representative in this month. That is the joint communication to the European Parliament and the Council on the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. These two documents are significant because it is the first time that the EU officially responded to the Indo-Pacific concept and clearly stated its rationale, principles, and also approaches to engage with this region. Besides, the documents illustrated that the EU entered into a new phase of geopolitical thinking and expected to strengthen its significance in the region to avoid to be decided by others. Therefore, by crafting a strategy, it signified there is increasing consensus in the EU to a certain extent on this region. However, we can also notice that the broad geographic targets and various security issues described in the document imply that the consensus among member states over the priorities is not consolidated enough. As a result, the EU has to harmonize this divide between member states if the EU aims to play a serious geostrategic role in this region. Okay, and then we can expand the incentives why the EU to propose the strategy at this moment. Theoretically speaking, shaping an integrated strategy is not only an essential step for the EU to construct the common security and defense policy, but also important to strengthen its strategic autonomy. From the first time that the EU adopted a security strategy in 2003, the overall security environment has changed dramatically, and the geopolitical risks are also increasing in recent years. Especially since 2018, the systematic rivalry against China has become increasingly serious. And we can see that more EU member states are concerned about the impact of the uncertainty in this region. In order to address these geopolitical challenges and new security threats, a new version of security strategy is definitely necessary for the EU. And then what are the key elements, content in the document of the EU at the moment? We can see that firstly, how did the EU define the area of Indo-Pacific? We can see that the EU provided a rather broad and vague definition to define the geographic areas covered in the strategy. It is from east coast of Africa to the Pacific Islands state. The reason, of course, is member states have different perceptions and interests to this region. I would like to share these pictures to explain how differently between member states to explain their perceptions about the geographic areas of the Indo-Pacific. You can see at least there are 4 different kind of definitions between member states to define the extent of this region. And then why does this region that matter to the EU? We can see that this region has 60% of world's populations, produce 60% of global GDP, and also contributed 2/3 of current global growth. And we can also notice that the increasing geostrategic uncertainty it did threaten on trade and supply chains and also cause tensions in technological, political, and security areas. Besides, the deterioration of human rights situation in some Asian countries may undermine the existing rules-based order and also challenges the ground of the EU to be a normative power. And these explanations we can find in the EU Indo-Pacific strategic papers. And we can also find that at least there are three elements we can identify in this strategy. The first one, multilateralism and low politics. The second one, we can also find a strong economic incentives to explain why the EU needs a strategy at the moment. And also, we can also find there are not that strong, but also important concern about security issues in this region. And then in the strategy, we can also find that the EU identify 7 priority areas: sustainable and inclusive prosperity, green transition, ocean governance, digital governance and partnership, connectivity, security and defense, and also human security. It is interesting that although security and defense is not ranked first, it is actually the first time that the EU officially declares it will deploy military missions and operations under the framework of the CSDP in the region. It did show a military commitment in the Indo-Pacific. And then we can expand further the implications behind this strategy. It is significant that the demand of rebalancing the relationships with China is important to the EU. Therefore, the strategy has emphasized on diversify cooperation and partnership with other regional actors, both bilaterally and multilaterally. It is also interesting that besides to cooperate with traditional partners, developing a partnership with India was underlined in the current strategy. This move will contribute to diversify connections with the regional actors, and also will contribute to reshaping in EU-India relations after the Brexit. Also, India is a relevant military power in the region. Shaping partnership with India actually has obvious strategic significance to the EU. Moreover, it is for the first time that the EU seriously consider the security threats in the region and explain some kind of political will to preserve the regional order by military ways. But we can also find that it is the languages used in the strategy paper at the moment are have rather obvious normative implications. For example, it's stressed on rules-based, it's stressed on principles, it's also stressed on like-minded. Those are the terms with rather obvious these strong normative implications. And it also reflects the principles or approaches that the EU used to conduct to develop foreign policies. Okay, and then we can explain why did the EU propose the strategy at the moment? Actually, the driving forces mainly came from member states, some key member states. Before the EU proposed its own version, France, Germany, and Netherlands have published their national strategic papers respectively. France was the first EU country to officially state the Indo-Pacific concept and conduct an Indo-Pacific strategy. 2 years later, in 2020, Germany and the Netherlands also released their strategic documents to the region. The growing concern from these founding member states did contribute to the internal debate in the EU about the Indo-Pacific concept. We start from France. we can see that the France is the only one EU member in this region still having geographical natural links, still have territories, citizens, and also military presence. And therefore, France considers itself a resident power in this region. In 2018, the President Macron officially stated that France still increased its role in this region. And then we can see that two ministries in France publish their own papers to discuss the role of France should play in this region. The military of armed forces and also the military for Europe and foreign affairs. And both of ministries, they proposed two versions of strategic papers about the Indo-Pacific concept. And we can find that it is not surprisingly that the versions by the Ministry of Armed Forces had more focuses on security issues and military activities of France in this region, while the versions of the Ministry for Europe and Foreign Affairs underlined the approaches of developing bilateral or multilateral dialogues and cooperations as more a focus on soft approaches to pursue national interests of France in this region. The reason that France became the first country to propose these documents is because for France, the Indo-Pacific space is a geographic reality. It is the only one EU member that still has territory, citizens, and military presence in this region. And these facts make the strategy of France involve more traditional security concern, military elements, and politics issues. These policy orientations also persuaded the EU to consider enhancing military presence in the strategy of the EU version. Besides, it is worth noting that although in its own Indo-Pacific strategy, France acknowledged the rise of China and its assertiveness may undermine the regional order, but it did not intend to exclude China from shaping the regional order. The reason is in some fields, France still maintains the possibility to cooperate with China. And this position is also in accordance with the German and the Netherlands position. The second one, I would like to talk about Germany. How did Germany consider region? We can see that it's the incentive of Germany to propose such kind of strategic paper is coming from the concern about the nexus of trade and security. In September 2000, Germany officially published its own strategic document to the Indo-Pacific. It's called Policy Guidelines for the Indo-Pacific region in order to play a more active role in this region. It is interesting that instead of propose a strategy, Germany used the term guidelines, which try to soften the tones of its future policies. Sorry, I lost one word here. The initiative of German government to seriously consider the Indo-Pacific concept mainly came from the economic concern instead of the geostrategic or geopolitical concern. Before the guidelines were published, the German government did not officially state about the Indo-Pacific concept. And we can see that although Germany does not have a geographical natural role in this region, but it has comprehensive trade interests over the region, and such kind of interests are become more are encountering more threats and challenges, and therefore force German government to take more actions to respond to the challenge. The guidelines by Germany had less focus on military implications for addressing the geopolitical dynamics in the region. The issues mentioned in the guidelines are rather broad, but it is not committed to undertaking serious military actions. And also, we find that the current guidelines only committed that training, equipment, and advisory services will be provided to support security forces. However, despite it seems that the German government tried to marginalize the military implications in the guidelines, Germany has become more cautious about the nexus of trade and security, and therefore the political will to use substantial means and actions is also increasing. Besides, we can find that the guidelines also stress that neither unipolar nor bipolar system conform to German interests. For Germany, it's preferred not to take a side, but it did admit that it is unavoidable to counter the growing influence of China in the region, and therefore, what approach the German government preferred its aims to expand bilateral and multilateral connectivity projects to the region by relying on economic and financial resources powers of Germany and the EU to shape the rule-based order of the regional infrastructure developed environment. Okay, that's the incentives and policy orientations from Germany. And the third one, the Netherlands, we can find that the policy orientation of the Netherlands is preferred and inclusive, but not value neutral vision to undertake the issues in the Indo-Pacific. In November 2020, the Netherlands also published a document. It's called the Indo-Pacific Guidelines for Strengthening Dutch and the EU cooperation with partners in Asia. The documents use more assertive language and more real political thinking, and it's implied that the Netherlands government had more political will to take more actions to address the issues in this region. We can also find that, like Germany, the Netherlands also use the term guidelines instead of strategy. Besides being a trading country, the concern about economic strategy, economic security is also the main incentive for the government to construct its Indo-Pacific concept. We can find that the positions between Netherlands and Germany is quite similar. It is also worth noting that the Netherlands was the first country to propose the policy paper, the Netherlands and China, a new balance in the EU, to officially respond to the challenges from the rise of China. However, although the Netherlands emphasizes the values-based and rules-based order, it did not aim to exclude the role of China from shaping the regional order. This position is also similar with Germany and France. And therefore, for Netherlands, an inclusive but not value-neutral strategic vision can produce unnecessary antagonism and also contribute to establishing more constructive regional order. Okay, that's the policy orientations from three founding members, and it is also believed that it is the factors to encourage or to pressure the EU to propose its own Indo-Pacific strategy. For the EU to present such kind of paper, it represents a historical moment. The documents show that the EU has acknowledged that the relevance to the regional geopolitical dynamics, and also has become more willing to preserve the interest with more commitment and actions. However, to implement the strategy completely, there are at least 3 challenges the EU has to address. To define the priorities, to transform words into actions, and also to reshape the cooperations with the United States and the United Kingdom. We can see that why to define the priorities is important, because we can see that the Netherlands and Germany, according to their national papers, these 2 countries had more focus on soft and normative and also regulatory issues, while France focused more on the real politic issues and also military dimensions. Such kind of divide not only reflected the different perceptions of their roles in the region, but also the distinct strategic culture and their strategic interest. However, lacking a strong stance may be a sign of lacking a definite political will to counter China or to address serious challenges in this region. Okay, the second one is to transform war into actions. We can see that if the EU want to realize its perceptions or its interest in this region, it still has to address how to transform words into actions. The strategy contains some ambitious projects, but if the EU aims to play a key role in this region, critical capabilities have to match its ambitions. At the moment, the expectation capability gap still existed, and such kind of gap will definitely prevent the EU from playing a significant role in the geopolitical playfield. To fix the gap, there are at least 2 questions the EU member states cannot avoid and have to reach consensus. Whether and how much security and military investment the EU can afford to the region. And the second one, how many risks the EU would take if undertaking military means to preserve a rule-based or values-based order. Okay, the third one refers to the relations with UK and the US in this region. It is the key to whether the EU will have a meaningful impact on the region. To reach a consensus about the division of labor with these 2 countries will contribute to shaping the Indo-Pacific regional order, definitely. But we can find out the 2 events happened recently still reflected that EU and the United States and even the United Kingdoms, they are not just partners, but sometimes they can be competitors. The first one is about the global gateway scheme. It implies that the EU also want to have their own projects of infrastructure development projects. And the other one that we can also find from the newspaper, the AUKUS nuclear power summary deal, is also kind of challenge the mutual interest between Europe and the United States. And therefore, in order to have a meaningful and substantial cooperation, some kind of mutual trust still have to be consolidated between these countries and partners. Okay, let me make my conclusion. The adoption of the EU Indo-Pacific strategy demonstrated that the EU has acknowledged the importance to shape a more significant presence in the region. And it has been considered as a result of a long debate in the EU and the different strategic priorities among member states. The key point is actions speak louder than words. Just as what Joseph Borrell, the High Representative, has said, if the EU intends to be a serious geopolitical actor, the EU has to learn to use the language of power. Also, if the EU intends to be a reliable power to regional actors, it has to show it must show rather than just tell. Okay, that's my presentation, and all the comments are welcome. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you so much. It's a very comprehensive reflection on the EU's strategy toward the Indo-Pacific region. Right now, I think I'm the third presenter with my co-author, Dr. Wang. We're gonna talk more about China, but it's related to China's foreign behavior. And it has, I hope, it has some implications for the European studies or EU studies because we think that our topic, because our topic is to examine whether China is promoting its China model, the authoritarian model, and obviously it seems to be an alternative to the EU and US-led liberal democracies. So we want to examine whether China is really pursuing this kind of strategy internationally, and we use some empirical data set to answer this question. Okay, so I'm gonna share our PowerPoints. Okay, right. So I will. So this presentation will be made by me and my co-author, Dr. Wang Guochen. And he is a economist, and he is currently a research fellow in the first research division, the Zhonghua Institute of Economic Research. Okay, so I will. Okay, so our research question really comes from a very moderate observation of the current situation regarding COVID-19. And we know that it looks like after the outbreak of the COVID-19, the different kinds of governments have choose different kinds of strategies to deal with this pandemic. And China definitely is using more dictator type of a strategy in dealing with the disease. But it looks like it's being quite effective in some ways. So we would say that the outbreak of the COVID-19 actually has already raised some questions about the effectiveness of democracy in dealing with these kind of diseases. So we want to examine whether under this kind of background, is China really promoting its authoritarian model internationally? So more specifically, we want to examine whether China is using its vaccine candidates, the two vaccine candidates, the Sinovac and Sinopharm, I believe, the two vaccines to win some friends. Okay, so we know that China has varieties of strategies internationally. It can use its foreign aid, it can use its Belt and Road Initiative, but vaccine is another kind of strategy China is right now adopting. So the vaccine candidates can help China to strengthen the relationship with authoritarian countries. And we want to examine whether China is really doing this way with the aim of promoting its authoritarian model around the world. So empirically, we collect the data set on China's behavior in helping or exporting its vaccine to different countries. So we count the different doses, the amount of doses each country receive. So we want to examine whether the authoritarian countries received more amounts of vaccine doses from China. Okay, so our data set is based on the bilateral COVID-19 vaccine diplomacy. So it's a bilateral relationship. So in the literature, we also see that in the academic circle as well as the policy circle, there is a great amount of voices on China's challenge. That is, China is promoting authoritarian model. So in 2015, Andrew Nathan, he wrote a quite policy-oriented piece warning the international society that China is really posing this kind of challenge to the world. But empirically speaking, there are still quite a lot of studies in the field mentioning that China's the foreign behavior is actually not really related to the promotion of authoritarian regime. So in 2014, Judith Bader, she argues that empirically speaking, she did quite a lot of empirical tests and found that China's foreign aid is actually not strongly related to the survival of authoritarian regimes, which means that a country, an authoritarian country, if the country receives more foreign aid from China, that doesn't really necessarily mean that the country will become more able to keep its authoritarian rule. So that's a debate within the academic circle. And another observation that is quite similar to the concern about China's promoting of the authoritarian model is that China is using its leverages in many ways to foster its relationship with existing friends and building alliances. Okay, so basically, in addition to those geopolitical or ideological concerns, there are a lot of literature mentioning that China is using its economic power to build alliances. Okay, so particularly about vaccine diplomacy in the media and I believe in the policy circle in Washington or in EU, there are quite a lot of discussions about the determinants of China's vaccine diplomacy. So, for example, in New York Times, there are also some articles saying that China is using vaccine to win friends. And there is a academic research made by Li this year, and he basically argues that with the common observation that China's vaccine diplomacy is to reinforce existing health diplomacy within the One Belt and Road Initiative and to project China's soft power. Okay, so in this paper, we want to examine whether this kind of observation has empirical support. So our hypotheses are that the first one is whether authoritarian countries receive more vaccines from China. And the second hypothesis we want to examine is that we want to see whether China exports more vaccine to countries that has a higher level of cooperation with it. And the alternative explanation is that whether China is following the international morality, that is, China is exporting more doses to poor countries and to countries where the COVID-19 cases are higher. So the countries which are suffering the COVID-19, and it looks like the international morality is to help those poor countries and to help those countries that are being seriously affected by COVID-19. But those are alternative hypotheses, but we want to examine whether China has its more strategic or geopolitical concerns under its vaccine behavior. So our measurement regarding the two hypotheses is the first one is regarding the level of democracy and authoritarianism. So we use the data set collected by VDEN, the variety of democracy. And the second data set we want to use is to measure the level of cooperation and partnership of those different countries with China. So we have a data set that is basically collected by my co-author, Dr. Wang. He has a data set on the strategic partnership. So we also are using the second measurement to measure our second hypothesis. Okay, so I want to invite my co-author, Dr. Wang, to introduce those empirical testing results. Okay, so Dr. Wang, please.
Thank you, every teachers. Now, let me convert PPT first. 出不来。
Right. So, but do you want me to show the PPT so I can actually follow your order? Because the PPT is at hand here in my computer. Oh, okay, cool.
Okay. Yo. Okay. Okay. As of July 29, 2021, mainland China has donated 26 million doses of COVID-19 medicine to more than 100 countries and the international organizations around the world.
Yeah, so sorry for the interruption. Sorry for the interruption. We didn't see your PowerPoints. The PowerPoints. Yes, right now.
有。
有。
Okay. 好。Among them, according to the data of our 85 countries collected in this article, Russia is the main recipient, receiving 10.65 million of those in total, which account for 32.7% of China's global donation. Here, following by Africa, the ratio is 23.6%. South Asia is close behind, with a ratio of 23.5%. Thus, when following our method is structural equation modeling. SEM is the combination of factor analysis and multiple regression analysis, and it is used to analyze the structural relationship between major variables and the latent construction. The research sample is 172 countries in 2020. The explained variable is the number of business donation from mainland China to other countries. Then explanatory variable have 9. The first group is variable of receiving countries, including gross domestic products, GDP, conference case for exporting countries, which is the dominant variable, and the degree of democracy. The second group is bilateral variables between mainland China and the receiving countries, including partnership SPR, export-import, foreign concentrate project FCP, and outward foreign direct investment OFDI. It is particularly worth mentioning that FCP mainly investment in infrastructure construction for OBOR. Thus, we select 5 tests. We select 5 indicators from Big Data. Additive polyarchy index, liberal component index, participatory component index, deliberative component index, and angulatory component index. Next, we use complementary factor analysis to combine these 5 indicators. Thus, the index we construct meet a series of requirements of CFA. See the result in the next table. First, due to the model setting, we fix the additive hierarchy index. So, 那个 factor loading is 1, and the error variance, NIL. The remaining variables are all significant positive, and the TMO is 0.7 by 0.795, which is greater than the 0.6 threshold. Bottom line case of fair is reach a statistically significant level of 0.01. Combo alpha internal consistent reliability is greater than the standard of 0.7. Composite reliability and the average variance interactive are greater than 0.6 threshold. Thus, another is partnership. By the end of 2020, mainland China has established partnership with 109 countries. Partnership in mainland China can be divided into 3 types: partner or cooperative partner, strategic partner, and comprehensive strategic partners. Thus, the number of partners is 81. For example, Bulgaria, Cyprus. The number of strategic partners is 64, such as Azerbaijan or Russia. The number of comprehensive strategic partners is 23, such as Uzbekistan and Pakistan. Thus, due to the additional of some insignificant variable, the residual will be enlarged, and it is difficult to meet the goodness of fit index. So, model 1 is reduced model, which only includes all significant variables to meet the fitness requirement. In order to provide that, the model constructed in this article is robust. See the next table, and chi-square is insignificant. NCI is between 1 and 3. GFI, HGFI, NFI, RFI, IFI, CFI, and NNFI are greater than 0.9 threshold. SMAR and the RMSEA are less than 0.05. So SEM has a very strict test procedure to verify that our model has no major measurement faults. Let us see result. First, B10 is significant negative, indicating that mainland China tend to prioritize mention to authoritarian countries. SPR is significant positive, indicate that the higher the level of partnership, the more mission they receive from mainland China. FCP is significantly positive, indicate that China mission diplomacy focus on stabilizing the infrastructure of OBOR. Finally, FEC is significantly negative, but IM is significantly positive, indicate that mainland China values the stability of raw material, not just all countries. Model 2 is a full model, which includes all possible variables above mentioned. Obviously, it does not meet the fitness requirement. The result is there. The direction of confusions in vegan SPR, FCP, FEC, and IM has not changed and has also reached a statistically significant level, highlighting the robust of the model. Second, insignificant variable includes GDP and conference case, showing that mission donation in mainland China are not based on humanitarian consideration. Finally, OFDI and export has not reached statistically significant level. The reason may be that OFDI and export in mainland China mainly concentrated in developing countries. Overall, promoting the authoritarian model is one of motivation of China's mission diplomacy. Strengthening the existing partnership is another major concern of China. Finally, SEM can also verify the interaction relation between vegan and the partnership, which is also become a force of sequence model comparison.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. So our paper is actually very preliminary, and as Dr. Wang mentioned that in the future we're gonna include the interaction term between the authoritarianism and the level of partnership in the future. So we will update those revisions to the website if you are interested in the future. Okay. So we still have like 12 minutes, and I saw from the chat room that there are several questions. One is for Dr. Gerke and another one is for Professor Chen. And those are very interesting questions. The first one is probably more about the recent events, the German election, and the second one is more about conceptualization. So so do I have to read those questions, or you can? So maybe Dr. Gerke, you can take the time to answer the question.
Thank you. The question addressed to me is on, I suppose, Germany's stake in EU policy, particularly on China policy. I would assume, which I would say the following. I would say there's definitely, it looks like there's change coming, because there's the coalition talks that are ongoing now in Germany are gearing towards a new coalition with two parties in them, which have been the most outspoken on foreign policy and on China, the Liberals, the Free Liberals, and the Greens, both of which have made clear statements in their manifestos on human rights situation in Xinjiang, on supply chain controls that are related to labor conditions, on generally framing China as much more as a rival, as any of the other two main parties in Germany have done. And the fact that they are lining up to be part of the government, I think looks to be that change in Germany might come. Colleagues before have also stressed that the mood in German business is also in the last 2 years shifting quite a bit. We've seen these publications, someone earlier showed these publications from the German Federation of Industry, who have in the last 2-3 years published 4 or 5 papers where they have taken a much more concerned view in regard to German economic foreign policy, German's policy with China more specifically. Similar views are, of course, coming out of industry associations in China. The European Chamber of Commerce in Beijing is also annually writing reports, sort of measuring business sentiment in China. The mood is certainly changing, and also in Germany. Even more so, I would say, of course, in Europe. Germany has been, I think, particularly on China policy, been a very strong reference point in Europe. There are much more critical voices all over Europe, particularly from countries in Central and Eastern Europe, but also from France and other major countries. And it is fair to say, I think, that under the German government in the last years, these have been managed in a way that these were not taking over. But the mood is definitely changing in many member states, and with a new German government, I think China policy might, in the next 2 years, also change more significantly than it has ever before. Against that argument stands, of course, significant. We hear about this, I think, in the next panel, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But of course, serious trade and investment relations, particularly of Germany and China. But as I said, I think in the next panel, someone will talk about these trade dependencies and how they influence the political economy in Europe, also to some degree. Yeah. So anyway, I hope I could sort of give some notion of this. I think for anyone interested in European China policy, the next 4 or 6 months will be very, very, very interesting and important to see what the German coalition talks will bring on the table, because the ramifications will no doubt be of European significance.
Yeah, thank you. We should keep eye to those development. Okay, so Professor Chen, do you want to answer the question about conceptualization of the Indo-Pacific?
Okay, sure. Thank you for questions from Professor Roctus. Okay. It is also strange to me why there are such different definitions just about geographic areas between EU member states. But it is not surprising. Surprisingly, actually, in the field of security and defense, in the EU, it still has intergovernmental culture and rules to make decisions. And we can also find that in this policy field, they are still having rather different policy orientations and strategic cultures among member states. The reason of having such different definitions relates to they have quite different interests they want to preserve in this region. For example, except to France, not EU members do have natural links with this region. And also we can find that not all EU members have massive economic interest in this region, like Germany. Therefore, a broad definition is the result of compromise, in my opinion, over the divide, and also allow member states to maintain more flexibility and more policy space. And we can also like the differences we not only find in the definition of geographic areas in the strategy, we can also find the differences also happened in about issues, priorities, and even means and approaches the UN member states they prefer to undertake in this region. However, different definitions actually will limit their participations in the relevant policies and issues. And therefore, although a strategy has been adopted by the EU at the moment, there are still many divides the EU has to address. It is the challenge I think it's still inevitable if the EU really want to have a real strategy in the Indo-Pacific. Such kind of divides still have to address and have to reach more consensus to share their common interests and common actions. Okay, I hope I already answered to your question. Thank you.
Okay, so there is a question regarding our paper. It's more about the model. I think it's probably because we didn't do a log transformation, but like Dr. Wang, you probably can answer the questions in more details.
One question. China donate receiving country. The reason is funding or fear. Through donation, I consider it. China consolidated the diplomacy relationship with authority countries, then to protect the economy and the trade security of Chinese firms in receiving countries. So it's really type was funding authority country. The factor is media.
Yeah, okay. There is a question coming from the chat room regarding our model 2, the coefficient, because of the unit of explanatory variables. I think it is. I think we look over it because we didn't do a log transformation. Is that right, Dr. Wang? Because right now in model 2, the coefficient of the GDP of a recipient country, all of them are 0, and you provide some explanations about the stories. But I think in our model, we are also going to look back to see whether we need to do some kind of log transformation. Yeah, but thank you. Are there any further questions? Okay, we still have 2 minutes left. Any questions? If no, then I want to give the floor to the organizer, Professor Ye. Do you want to say a few words? Because this is our last session of the day.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Dr. Zhou, and all the presenter of this section. And tomorrow we will start at 2 p.m. and in Taipei, and also 8 a.m. in Brussels. So please come back to the workshop and also participate the section, the rest of the 3 sections of the second day's workshop. And I think today we just finished the 2 sections, and thank you very much for participation, and see you tomorrow. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. See you tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. And
You.
bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
All right.